Okay, so hello everybody, and welcome to this instalment of what does the future sound like? We're really lucky to be joined today by Carol Isaacs, who, if you don't know her work, is oh gosh, Carol, what can I say? Pop musician, klezmer musician, cartoonist, writer. Um, yeah, we're really grateful to have you here to talk
Thanks
to
for
us.
having me, guys. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Pleasure. I think for viewers who might not know your work very well, it'd be really lovely if you could just start off by talking to us a bit about how you got into klezmer music and Jewish music in general in your career.
By accident, completely by accident. I was brought up in a home where we played. It was all classical music. There was no Jewish music, and there was certainly no Middle Eastern music. I think my parents perhaps didn't want to hear that. But I've been playing Western pop music all my life, and then I don't know, 10, 12 years ago. No, 15 years ago, I was working in a band with a band, and we played this WOMAD festival. And on another stage was this amazing music, and I rushed to see who it was, and it was a klezmer band. I'd never heard this music before, and I loved it, and I didn't know why. So there was a chance to take part in Klezfest, which is a klezmer festival. It's been running every year in London here, run by the JMI, and that's where I met Francesca, and we kind of formed a band, and then another band was formed, the London Klezmer Quartet. And it's been like, the last 10 years we've been 11 years for the LKQ. So that's that part. And then hearing in that music what I thought was Oriental sounds, I kind of followed that train further. And it was actually Francesca who introduced me to Ahmed Mukhtar, who she was working with a few years ago, who was this amazing Iraqi oud player. And I kind of got into, and he asked me to join the band, the Baghdad ensemble. We were both part of that ensemble, and that's how I got into Iraqi music, so through Jewish music, klezmer music rather, bizarrely.
And so that's kind of culminated recently in this amazing project that you're doing called the Wolf of Baghdad, which is a sort of multi-form project, I suppose.
It's audiovisual. My other career is as a cartoonist, and this was my first long-form book. And when I was drawing it, I thought at the time, wouldn't it be great to combine the two strange practices of my life together? So I thought, well, I'll make an animation with the soundtrack as well and incorporate the music that my family would have listened to and that the Jews of Iraq would have listened to. And so that's what I did. And we crowdfunded the soundtrack last year, and it's now available as a DVD. And we also perform it live, rather like a silent movie where you have the animation on screen and you have the musicians playing along to accompany it.
And so I'd really recommend to anyone who hasn't got a copy of the book or seen it. I found it a really moving read. So it kind of do you want to talk to us a little bit about how it tells the story of your own family?
Yeah, it's basically wordless. It's sort of the central character is myself, and the book starts off in a black and white London, and through the memories, snippets of recollections from my family, I take a journey to Baghdad and see it through their eyes. I actually went round and I interviewed a lot of my family for their recollections, both good and bad. And a lot of the things I hadn't heard before because they didn't talk about the bad stuff that much. And so I built up this picture of how Baghdad must have been to them, and I kind of drew it. And in the book you see me going through their house, going through their world. They can't see me, but I can see them. They're like these ghosts. Because one of my aunties said, well, even if we could go back to Iraq, it would be as Jewish ghosts. So I used that as a premise to populate the book.
And so what we find quite a lot of when people come to the museum is that I think the general population is very unaware of Jewish migrations from the Middle East generally, but especially in this case from Baghdad. It's a story that is not told very much, even in kind of mainstream Jewish culture. So I was really excited at the back of when I read the book. At the back of the book is a picture of an amulet that your mother owned. It's beautiful. Is that a bit of ivory?
The little Hamsa at the bottom, and this is a wolf's tooth at the top.
That's a wolf's tooth.
And it's set in gold, and this would be pinned to the crib of a child to protect it from the evil eye and any, evil spirits that may be lurking in the house.
So it's very much linked to the wolf in the Wolf of Baghdad. The wolf is a figure, a protective figure, which is kind of, I suppose, in Western culture quite unusual. That's not how we think of a wolf, and particularly protective towards children, and protective against kind of infant death and mortality. So I was inspired by that story to have a scout around in our collection, and I'm just going to share with you something that I found that really made me think of you, Carol, which is this piece of embroidery that we have, and we don't know very much about it. We think it might be from Syria, but we're not sure. And it was brought to Manchester in the early 20th century. The bottom piece is actually a pillowcase, but it's been sewn together with this top piece to make a lectern cover, and that's quite common for people to bring embroidered pieces and then put things together to make things for the synagogue when they were establishing synagogues. But what made me think of your book is that the little sign of the Hamza has been embroidered in this pillowcase. There's an Arabic letter here. I was talking to some of the Muslim women that we work with. They were trying to figure out, this is quite an old-fashioned sort of way of writing, but they think it's something to do with the naming of God. The top piece, these letters M for whoever owned this, that we don't know who this person was. We've got some other examples with these pillowcases that they were used in bris or circumcision ceremonies. Not quite sure how they were used. I think maybe the baby was placed on them, but they're all quite pristine. So but you were saying, Carol, that your family, there was very similar sort of embroidery in your family.
Yes, there is. We had some things, and we sent them, my mother sent them to the Babylonian Heritage Museum in Israel, where there's a huge collection of exactly these pieces. And this is just beautiful, a beautiful example.
It's gorgeous, isn't it? But I couldn't find anything in our collection featuring a wolf's tooth. I had an exciting moment where I thought we might have something from a wolf, but we haven't got it. So it was really kind of interesting to read the book. I wonder if we maybe could talk a little bit about the music that was put with the animation, and whether the figure of the wolf kind of features in that music, or the sense of protection.
Yeah, well, for the soundtrack, I wanted to pick pieces that would have been familiar, would have been sung often by the family in Iraq, and I went for a mixture of secular and religious and folk. So in the secular music, you've got several songs by a famous composer called Saleh al-Kuwaiti, who was active in the 1920s and 1930s. He wrote a lot. Him and his brother actually had a band, and they wrote a lot of music that is still popular today. If you play a lot of these songs, people today will recognize them. They may not know that they were written by Jews. In fact, Saddam Hussein went out of his way to make sure that their names were erased from the history books. He wanted to call them traditional. But people who know realize that these were written by by Jewish writers. So we include some of those, and also some religious song. And I was helped a lot by Daniel Jonas, who's the MD of the band Ayin, who provides the soundtrack, and also by Keith Clouston, who is an oud player who's studied in Tunis and worked with Natasha Atlas, so he's very familiar with a lot of the more classical Arab pieces. And so between us, we picked this lovely repertoire of some folk songs. It's a great Iraqi folk song called Chimali Wali, which, Fran, you remember that Ahmed taught that to us.
Gorgeous.
And, there's some piyutim, some religious songs that Daniel picked, Hon to Hon, which is one of them. And sorry, the lyrics about being merciful. It's a prayer of supplication that's usually sung before major festivals. And the lyrics go, "Be merciful to your children who return to you, who stand with you before you with trepidation. Fearful of the time they will be called to judgment, but it is for that reason that they come in distress." And then there's another tune we do called Yad Khatan Heni about may your hand guide me. So these appear, because there are no words in the animation as such, there's no dialogue. They appear as part of the story, you know, where she's looking for help, where the character is, you know, looking for protection. And there's also another piece, which I discovered only recently, called, it's a lullaby, an Iraqi lullaby called Dililo, which means beloved. And I just excitingly found out the other day from one of my older relatives that, yes, this lullaby was sung to him as when he was a baby, but the lyrics are a kind of it's a hidden message, there's a covert message in there, and it's from the time of the Ottoman Empire. And it's actually a song about separation. It dates to Ottoman times. It was traditionally sung by a mother for her baby boy, but hidden inside the lyrics was a message about conscription. Many Jews at that time were forced into conscription into the Ottoman army. In fact, my own great-grandfather was taken and never heard of again. On my mother's side, and also on my father's side, we have people who just disappeared. So some of the lyrics talk about beloved, oh my boy, my son is beloved. His enemy is ailing, dwells in the desert. The mountain has come between me and you. It seems my eyes will not meet your eyes. It seems like the sound of a child crying from afar. So it's like the separation of the mother and the child, you know, so it's the child lost in the desert, separated from the mother by the Ottoman army. So those are all the songs that we picked, and we tried to, it followed the story and it followed the emotion. And within the music also, the different modes, the maqamat, which I don't know if your audience know, that it's a different language in Arab music. The different maqams, each maqam stands for can evoke a certain feeling. So some evoke feelings of joy, some evoke feelings of great sadness. So we tried to match the maqam with what was going on the screen as well.
Particularly aware about Babylonian Jews or Iraqi Jews growing up, probably until I met you. And when we started working with Ahmed, was the first, I feel like I was there with you when you had this window into starting to learn about your own musical culture. And when you bought your quarter tone accordion, it was such a big deal. And that project was so amazing. In fact, it's all on YouTube. I have watched it occasionally. I'm like, oh, it sounds amazing. And I just feel like it's just so cool to kind of see this organic journey that's happened for you. It's a sort of, it's like a cultural moment. It's like you're raising awareness of this culture that's essentially, I think, like marginalized. If like you know, Jewish culture in general is marginalized, and you have like Ashkenazi culture, which is the dominant voice within the minority mixed diasporas, and then now I feel like this is the time for the other voices to shine. I mean, they all need to shine because they're all misunderstood and very little known about. But this is such a, you know, huge number of people who are affected by, like, you know, historical events.
The future is progress. This constant idea of, you know, we're developing, we're evolving, we're improving as a kind of collective humanity. And actually thinking back to my own family's history, there's this sense of, you know, in Aleppo, for example, where my family were from, for so many hundreds of years, the Muslim and the Christian and the Jewish populations lived pretty peacefully side by side. And actually there was a huge amount of cultural exchange. And just as you were saying, Laura, you can even see it in the architecture of what is now the Manchester Jewish Museum. There's these Arabic influences in the decoration. And if you go back to Ladino music in its sort of more original, earliest form, it's extremely kind of Middle Eastern in in the sort of microtonality of it, and that later became much more westernized. And nothing wrong with that, but it's just for me being able to kind of touch back on the past and realize that the future could look more like the past in the best sort of ways. And I think I often tell this story about how when the Aleppian Jews came to Manchester at Hanukkah, they always lit one extra candle, and that extra candle was in gratitude to the people in the Ottoman Empire, what was then Aleppo, what was then Aleppo was in the Ottoman Empire, in gratitude for being welcomed in as refugees. And I love that story because it has such a resonance today. It's got a sort of inverse resonance because of the amount of refugees who now need to come from that part of the world to the West.
The most amazing thing has been that whenever we do these performances, we play to not necessarily Jewish audiences, it's mixed, and we have the most amazing response from either Iraqis in the diaspora or other Middle East Arabs from the Middle East who come, and non-Jewish, who come and they recognize this music, they understand it, and it's like we're opening dialogues between these disparate communities and talking about stuff, culture and music, and it's another way to sort of connect with people. That's really rather beautiful and quite unexpected, I have to say.
Well, it's nice when it's easy to think that you won't be understood or that the music won't reach the people, but it must be really, really reassuring and validating when you do something and see, well, actually people need this. People can relate to it and connect to it, and the story. More about sort of your background in terms of kind of growing up in the UK as as an Iraqi Jew, and how different that was to maybe being part of like the normal Ashkenazi kind of experience. Like, did you integrate? Did you have your own thing going on where your practice is different? Like,
yeah, I mean, coming from there are barely 10,000 Iraqi Jews in the UK at the moment. I don't know how many there were when I was growing up, but a lot of them come from India, from the Iraqi community there. So we're not that many in the grand scheme of things. We're quite a minority within a minority, and that's how I felt when I went to a very, very British school, and there were only 30 Jewish girls out of about 900 girls, and then I was the only Mizrahi Sephardi Jew, so I was the other within the other, if you see what I mean. And in my house, it was very kind of Iraqi. We spoke Arabic. My grandmothers never spoke English, so that was the language there. But then when you stepped out the house, you were British. And so I always lived in two worlds. I had this kind of, and this is something that other people recognize when we do the Wolf, and I talk about the Wolf of Baghdad, I get people who parents have come from somewhere else who've grown up in the UK also understand this duality and this kind of, you adopt, like you become like a chameleon. You can kind of fit in most places because you're used to sort of being one person there and one person there. So people whose parents came from Sri Lanka, from Jamaica, from Afghanistan, they said, yeah, we know that feeling, we understand it, that kind of, and also the feeling of this longing for a homeland that you've never visited, that your families come from and that they talk about, but that you've never experienced. And there's a great Finnish word that I like to use, kaukkukaipu, which means nostalgia for a homeland you've never visited. And I think there's an equivalent Welsh one as well. I can't pronounce.
Yeah. I was
But
going to say it's a very Welsh concept as well. My Welsh friends talk about that sense of a longing for something that you didn't. Yeah.
yeah, and we talked, essentially my parents never really, they didn't look back. It was all about looking forward, as with a lot of Jewish refugees, immigrants, when they leave, it's move forward, you kind of go become whatever you're going to be. That my dad was incredibly English. You know, he went to the city every day in his pinstripe suit with the Guardian under his arm. You know, he adopted that persona. He became British. So it was like they didn't really look back. And to that end, like I said before, we didn't have the music in the house. We had classical music. So I didn't grow up with this, which is very odd when you think about it, but not. They just wanted to make the best of what they had. They left with nothing. They came to a new country, so they adopted the ways of the new country, a familiar pattern.
I think it's really interesting, that idea of being other, but being other within another. And a lot of the stories in our collection, for example, that experience of being kind of second generation, it's quite varied actually, people's experiences of, and lots of people talking about regret of not speaking Arabic at home, becoming so anglicised that then later in life that they can't speak Arabic or Ladino or other languages. And I just wondered do you think that this is a bit of a strange question, perhaps you may not want to answer it, but is there an advantage being an other within another? Can you see kind of positive aspects in terms of your...
Definitely. Oh, for sure. Like I said before, I can travel mostly anywhere and feel kind of at home.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't feel, and maybe it's because of my nomadic lifestyle, being a musician, you know, we travel and we just have to get on with people. And, you know, I've traveled in countries where I don't speak the language and I'm making music with people, and we don't need the language because we've got music in common. So maybe that's an advantage, being a musician. But definitely you have the understanding of how lucky you are to have a British passport, and B, the journey that got you here.
Mm-hmm.
When you ask about it as well, and you feel very, very fortunate. I mean,
yeah. The other within the other is very interesting, because I feel like from the outside, I wonder whether people are aware how other Jewish people often feel in sort of British society, and it's something that doesn't seem to be widely understood, and it also how many different types of groups of Jewish people there are and where they come from. And yeah, I was thinking about with the musician thing, it's a bit chicken and egg. Like, you know, are we traveling musicians because we feel more comfortable anywhere except kind of sort of scene or community?
I snuck in an Iraqi song into a klezmer tune.
Did you?
Yes. Kiev to Karada on the LKQ, one of the LKQ albums, is essentially a Turkish show, which is a certain kind of a rhythm, sort of Middle Eastern rhythm that the Klezmer adopted, and I managed to sneak in a bit of Chemali Wali into that.
Oh, did you? Oh, yeah, I think
it was spotted when we were on tour. I can't remember where it was. There was this Iraqi musician in the audience. He came up to me and said, "I know that tune that you played, Chemali Wali. Oh, I'm hearing it in this context." So it was picked up by one person at least.
So you came into kind of Jewish music after doing sort of working in pop music, essentially.
Oh, yeah, I'd never touched it. I'd never done it before. A flattened second was a mystery to me. I had no idea. Breakish, what's that?
But then did you but when you sort of came to Klezmer, did you feel like it was also your music that you could relate to? Like
the Oriental side, like I said, like that some of the scales did, especially the Fragish, some of them did. It was like, oh, that sounds vaguely Arabic. Oh, I wonder why I like that. I might have heard in our synagogue. I went to, my parents were founding members of the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue in Wembley. And it was essentially Spanish and Portuguese liturgy. But when we had the occasional Egyptian or whoever was visiting and they'd sing in various maqams, I'd go, oh, that would be interesting to me. But it reminded me a bit of that. But generally, we'd follow the more kind of European, Southern Mediterranean melodies.
Is that because there were more Sephardi Jews,
Yes.
so that was a more within the other. They're
Yes,
the dominant
yes.
other. Yeah, the dominant, because I think that also is something people get confused around. Sephardi, which is also complex because that spans Spain to basically Syria, and then the Judeo-Arabic heritage, which is historically quite separate after a certain period.
Yes, correct.
So
I was confused as well. For a long time I kept calling myself Sephardi. I think I'm Mizrahi, which I think may have been a slight negative connotations when used in Israel. I'm using it now, Mizrahi. But if you push me, I'll say Babylonian. I'm a Babylonian.
Yeah.
We all are. I mean, why not just go back?
Yeah.
What should the future be? What needs to happen?
Good question. It's good to have a roadmap of some kind. I mean, what you guys are doing and what Manchester Jewish Museum is doing is amazing and wonderful, shining a spotlight on various aspects of Jewish music. I mean, that's a way forward to get stories out, really. Musicians will keep on coming up with stuff, and it just would be nice to have it out there.